For over 50 years, Henry Calloway believed he knew every detail of his life. A solid marriage, loving children, and a peaceful old age with the woman who had been by his side all his life. But everything he thought was true was about to come, crashing down. One silent night, a secret buried for decades would come to light forever, changing the way Henry saw his wife, his story, and even himself. A lost son, a hidden truth, and now a choice that could redefine everything before it's too late. But are some wounds too deep to heal? And what happens when the past returns to demand answers no one is ready to give? Stay with us until the end to find out how this incredible journey of love, regret, and forgiveness unfolds. I'd love to hear where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying this, let me know in the comments and be sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely won't want to miss. Henry Calloway sat in the living room of his modest home, the late afternoon sun casting a warm golden glow through the window. The familiar sights of well-loved furniture and framed family photos surrounded him, filling the space with memories of a life well lived alongside his wife Eleanor. At 78, he had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their quiet life in small town Ohio, a life marked by shared laughter, challenges, and the gentle passage of time. But today something felt different. Eleanor sat across from him, her fingers nervously tracing the outline of an aged envelope resting on her lap, a relic from a time long past. She stared at it, lost in thought, her brow furrowed with an emotion Henry could not quite place. He had known Eleanor for over 5 decades, and in all that time he had never seen her so preoccupied. The vibrant woman who had been his partner through thick and thin now appeared fragile, as if she were carrying an unbearable weight. "Eleanor," he asked, gently, concern lacing his voice, "is everything all right?" She looked up, her hazel eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's just—" She hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been thinking about the past, and about something I need to tell you." Henry's heart raced. They had always shared an open and honest relationship, but the way she spoke now sent a chill down his spine. "What is it?" he urged, leaning forward instinctively, sensing that the news would change everything. "Taking." A deep breath, Eleanor clasped the envelope tightly, her knuckles whitening. "Henry, there's something from my past that I've kept from you. I've carried it for so long and I can't hide it any longer." "Whatever it is, you can tell me," he reassured her, though a knot formed in his stomach. With shaking hands, Eleanor opened the envelope and pulled out a worn piece of paper. "Before we got married while you were serving in the army, I became pregnant." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Henry's mind raced as he processed her words. "Pregnant?" he echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling. "It was a mistake. I was scared and I didn't know how to tell you. I gave the baby up for adoption." Henry felt as if the ground had shifted beneath him. The world he had known, his solid marriage, the life they had built together, suddenly felt like a fragile facade. "You gave our child away," he managed to say, his voice breaking. "I didn't know what to do," Eleanor cried, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was terrified of losing you. I thought you'd never forgive me. I thought I could just forget it. But I can't live with this secret anymore." Henry stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He felt a storm of emotions swirling within him, betrayal, confusion, heartbreak. "How could you keep this from me for so long?" he demanded, his voice rising. "How could you not tell me?" "I was afraid," she shouted back, her voice raw with emotion. "I was terrified of what you would think of me. I loved you, Henry. I still do. But I didn't know how to face you with this." "Loved me? How can you say that when you've been hiding something so monumental?" The words slipped out harsher than he intended, but he couldn't help it. "I've spent my entire life believing in a lie." Eleanor's face crumpled as she sank back into her chair, the weight of her confession crashing down on her like a tidal wave. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I thought I was protecting you. Protecting us." Henry turned away, pacing the room as he tried to make sense of it all. His heart ached, not just from the revelation, but from the shattering of the trust he had placed in their relationship. "Do you know how long I've spent loving you, thinking we were building a life together based on honesty? I know, she replied, her voice thick with sorrow. "And I hate myself for it. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could carry this burden alone, but I can't anymore. I need you to understand." He paused, looking out the window at the fading autumn light. "How can I understand? You've taken away my right to know my own child. You've robbed me of that experience." "I didn't want to rob you of anything," Eleanor's voice cracked, desperation creeping in. "I wanted to protect you from the pain. I thought it would be easier this way." "Easier?" Henry scoffed bitterly. "You think lying to me for years is easier? You think I'd rather live in ignorance?" Eleanor's shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and Henry felt a pang of sympathy amidst his anger. She had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together, and now she was crumbling before him. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice softer now. "You've shattered everything I believed about us." "I know," she murmured, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "But I still love you, Henry. Please believe that." "Love," he repeated the word, tasting bitter on his tongue. "How can I trust that love when it's built on a foundation of secrets?" Eleanor looked at him, her eyes pleading. "I've carried this for 55 years, Henry. I was young and scared. I thought I could forget, but I never did. I thought I could take it to the grave." Henry turned away, his heart heavy. He needed space to think, to breathe. "I need some time," he finally said, his voice hoarse. I can't process this right now." "Please don't shut me out," she begged, her voice quivering. "I can't lose you." "I just need some time," he repeated, walking toward their bedroom, leaving Eleanor alone in the living room, her sobs echoing in the silence of their home. As he closed the door behind him, Henry leaned against it, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. The love they had built, the life they had shared, now felt tainted by the secret Eleanor had kept. He ran a hand through his hair, battling the storm of emotions raging inside him. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting shadows in the room, and Henry knew that whatever lay ahead would demand more than he could give. He felt lost adrift in a sea of uncertainty, wondering if he could ever find his way back to the love he once knew. Henry Calloway stood in the dim light of the living room, the weight of Eleanor's confession still heavy on his heart. The small box she had given him sat on the coffee table, its contents a painful reminder of the life he thought he knew. He picked it up, the wood, feeling rough against his fingertips, and opened it once more. Inside lay old documents, a faded birth certificate, and the adoption paperwork, both yellowed with age. Above the papers lay a photograph of a small baby, innocent and unaware of the turmoil that surrounded his very existence. He sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair, and sat down heavily on the couch. The walls of their home felt like they were closing in, filled with memories that now felt tainted. How could Eleanor have kept such a monumental secret from him for over 50 years? He felt a mix of anger and sorrow swirling inside him, battling for dominance. He wanted to scream, to cry, but instead he sat in silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, echoing the seconds of his life slipping away. The next morning, Henry woke up with a resolve that surprised even him. He needed answers. The need to find the child Eleanor had given up gnawed at him. It was a compulsion he couldn't ignore. After breakfast, he found himself staring at the yellow pages, flipping through the listings for private investigators. He knew it would be a long shot, but it was better than sitting in silence, consumed by uncertainty. After making a few calls, Henry decided to meet with Greg Porter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving adoption cases. He felt a mixture of hope and dread as he drove to the small office located in a nondescript building in downtown Columbus. The sun was bright, but the warmth did little to ease the chill in his heart. "Mr. Calloway," Greg greeted him as he walked into the office, his voice deep and reassuring. He was a man in his late 50s with graying hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Yes, that's me," Henry replied, shaking Greg's hand. "Please have a seat." Greg gestured toward a worn leather chair across from his desk. "I understand you're looking for your son." Henry nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "I just found out he exists. My wife, she gave him up for adoption before we got married. I need to find him." Greg leaned back in his chair, studying Henry for a moment. "This is a delicate situation. How old would he be now?" "If he was born in '68, then he should be around 55. Henry said, his voice cracking slightly. Okay, we'll start with the adoption agency. It's likely we can track down the records, Greg said, taking notes. But I should warn you, old adoption records can be tricky. Some states have strict privacy laws, and it may take time to unearth any information. Henry felt a flicker of frustration at the thought of more delays. I understand, I want to know if he's okay, if he had a good life. I'll do my best to find that out for you, Greg assured him. But I can't promise anything. Are you prepared for whatever you might uncover? Henry took a deep breath, his mind racing with possibilities. Yes, I have to be. After their meeting, Henry returned home feeling a mix of anticipation and anxiety. He found Eleanor in the garden tending to the flowers that had begun to wilt in the autumn chill. She looked up, a smile fading from her lips as she noticed the serious expression on his face. Did you find out anything? She asked, her voice laced with apprehension. Not yet, but I've hired a private investigator. He's going to look into it, Henry replied, trying to gauge her reaction. Eleanor's brow furrowed. You're really going to do this after everything? I have to know, Henry said firmly, his heart racing. I need to find him, Eleanor. I can't just let this go. She looked down at the flowers, her hands trembling slightly. What if he doesn't want to meet you? What if he hates me? Henry stepped closer, his voice softening. This isn't just about you. It's about him too. He deserves to know where he came from, and I deserve to know if he's all right. Eleanor nodded slowly, tears brimming in her eyes. I never wanted to hurt you, Henry. I was scared. I thought I could carry that secret forever. I know, he said gently, but now we have to face it. We owe it to him. Days turned into weeks as Henry waited for news from Greg. Each passing day felt like an eternity filled with anxiety and restless nights. He found himself staring at the box of documents more often than he would like to admit, wondering about the child Eleanor had given up, the child who was now a grown man with a life of his own. Finally, the phone rang one afternoon, breaking the silence of the house. Henry's heart raced as he picked up the receiver, his hands clammy. Mr. Calloway, Greg's voice came through steady and professional. I have some information for you. Go ahead, Henry urged, his pulse quickening. I tracked down your son. His name is Daniel Turner, and he lives in New York. He's a successful lawyer, Greg explained, his voice measured. Henry felt a rush of emotions, excitement, fear, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. What else can you tell me more about him? I have some background information, but it's important to approach this carefully. He was adopted by a good family and appears to have had a stable upbringing. However, he has no idea about his biological parents, Greg cautioned. Stable upbringing. That's good to hear, Henry whispered, relief washing over him. What do I do now? How do I contact him? I would recommend writing him a letter, something heartfelt. You need to be honest about who you are and why you're reaching out. But be prepared, he might not respond right away, Greg advised. Henry took a moment to digest this, his mind racing. I'll write to him. I have to. After hanging up, he sat down at the kitchen table, grabbing a pen and paper. His heart pounded as he tried to find the right words. How do you introduce yourself to a son you've never met? He took a deep breath and began to write. Dear Daniel, I am writing to you with a heavy heart and a sense of urgency. My name is Henry Calloway, and I am your biological father. I understand this may come as a shock, and I can't imagine how you might feel reading this. The truth is, I've spent the last 55 years living with a secret that I only recently uncovered. Your mother Eleanor was scared and made a choice that changed all of our lives. I want you to know that this letter comes from a place of love and a desire to connect if you're willing. I have so many questions, and I hope you might be open to meeting one day. Regardless of what you decide, I want you to know that you are loved and thought of. Sincerely, Henry Calloway. With trembling hands, he folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and addressed it to Daniel's law office in New York. The act felt monumental, as if he was opening a door to a future he had never anticipated. He drove to the post office, his heart racing with anxiety and hope. As he dropped the envelope into the mailbox, he felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. What would Daniel think? Would he be angry, confused, or perhaps even curious? As the days turned into a week, Henry found himself falling into a rhythm of waiting, trying to distract himself with daily activities. Yet his mind often drifted back to the letter and the son he had never known. Eleanor watched him closely, a mixture of concern and empathy in her eyes. They both knew that the outcome of Henry's search could change everything. Then one evening, as twilight settled over the small town, the phone rang again. Henry's heart leaped into his throat as he rushed to answer it. "Hello," he said breathlessly. "Mr. Calloway, this is Daniel Turner. I received your letter." A calm voice responded from the other end. Henry's heart raced as he struggled to find his words. "Thank you for calling. I wasn't sure if you would." There was a pause on the line, and Henry could hear Daniel breathing a sign that he was processing the situation. "I don't know what to make of this. It's a lot to take in." Daniel finally said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. "I understand. Trust me, this is not easy for me either," Henry replied, his heart pounding. I wanted you to know that I'm here, and I want to explain everything." "I need time to think about this," Daniel said, clearly weighing his options. "I appreciate you reaching out, but I have questions. So many questions." Henry nodded, even though Daniel couldn't see him. "Of course, take all the time you need. I just hope that one day we can meet." "Maybe," Daniel replied, a hint of vulnerability breaking through his otherwise composed demeanor. "I'll call you back." As they hung up, Henry felt a rush of emotions, hope, fear, and a sense of connection that had been absent for so long. He turned to find Eleanor standing in the doorway. Henry Calloway sat on a park bench, his heart pounding in his chest. He had spent the last few days in New York City grappling with a torrent of emotions, after discovering that the son he never knew existed was now a successful attorney named Daniel Turner. The weight of Eleanor's confession still hung heavily over him, yet an unexpected flicker of hope ignited within him. Perhaps this encounter could bring some semblance of closure, or maybe even a chance at reconnection. He glanced at his watch. It was almost time for their meeting. The park was a patchwork of autumn colors, with leaves dancing in the crisp breeze. Henry felt out of place amid the lively atmosphere, as if he were observing life through a glass wall. He had spent years building a life with Eleanor, only for it to feel suddenly fragile and uncertain. The thought of meeting Daniel both terrified and exhilarated him. Would he see a reflection of himself in this man? Would Daniel harbor resentment for a father who had been absent from his life? As the minutes ticked by, Henry's thoughts spiraled into a whirlpool of what-ifs. Would Daniel even want to know him? Would he care about the man who had spent decades with his mother while he grew up under the care of strangers? Just as doubt began to creep into his mind, he spotted a tall figure approaching. The man was well-dressed, exuding an air of confidence that struck Henry as both intimidating and familiar. "Mr. Calloway," Daniel's voice was steady, yet there was an underlying tension, a guardedness that couldn't be ignored. "Yes, that's me." Henry stood extending a hand, though he felt like he was reaching into the abyss. Daniel took his hand, but didn't shake it with much enthusiasm. "Thanks for meeting me," Daniel said, his expression unreadable. "I didn't expect you to come all this way." "I felt it was important," Henry replied, struggling to find the right words. "I wanted to meet you to understand. Understand why my mother gave me up." Daniel's tone was sharper than Henry had anticipated. "Or why you're just showing up now after all these years." Henry's heart sank at the accusation. "I didn't know about you until recently. I'm still processing everything. I just want to talk." Daniel's gaze shifted to the ground, as if the weight of Henry's words pressed down on him. "You want to talk, but what is there to say? You're a stranger to me, and I'm not sure I want to hear what you have to say." "I understand," Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not here to disrupt your life. I just want to explain that everything." "Explain what? That you weren't there, that you chose not to find me. I had a good life, Mr. Calloway. My parents loved me. I never needed to know about you or my biological mother." "Daniel, please." Henry implored, feeling the desperation seep into his voice. "I'm not asking you to forget your parents. I just want you to know that I care. I've spent years thinking about you, wondering who you were, what your life was like." Daniel's jaw tightened and he took a step back. "You don't get to say that. You had your chance to be in my life and you didn't want it." A heavy silence fell between them, punctuated only by the distant laughter of children playing in the park. Henry looked away, his heart aching under the weight of Daniel's words. He understood the resentment. It was a natural response. "I can't change the past," he finally said, his voice trembling. "But I'm here now and I want to know you." "Why?" Daniel challenged, crossing his arms defensively. "What's in it for you? Is this some kind of redemption story for you?" "No," Henry replied earnestly. "It's not about redemption. It's about the truth. Eleanor, your mother, she was my wife for over 50 years. I loved her deeply. But now I find myself questioning everything I thought I knew about our life together." Daniel's expression softened slightly, but he remained guarded. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Henry continued, gathering his thoughts, "that Eleanor carried this secret for so long. She was terrified of losing me if I ever found out, and now with her health deteriorating, I feel a sense of urgency to understand the full picture, who you are, what kind of man you've become." Daniel released a heavy sigh, his body language betraying a flicker of vulnerability. "You really have no idea what it's like to grow up not knowing, do you?" "No, I don't," Henry admitted, shaking his head. "I can only imagine the pain of being separated from your biological family, but I want to learn. I want to hear your story." "All right," Daniel said, his voice steadying. "I'll listen, but don't think for a second that this is an easy conversation for me." "Thank you," Henry said, relief flooding through him. "I appreciate that." Daniel took a seat on the bench next to Henry, the tension between them still palpable. "So what do you want to know?" Henry hesitated, unsure where to begin. "I want to know about your life. How was it growing up? What kind of person are you?" Daniel shrugged, his expression shifting to one of contemplation. "I grew up in a good neighborhood, with parents who cared about me. They were loving and supportive. I had everything I needed, but I always felt like something was missing." He paused, looking out at the park. "I never knew why I felt that way until recently." "Do you think it was because of the adoption?" Henry asked gently. "Maybe," Daniel replied, his voice quiet. "I've never really thought about it. I just accepted what my life was. I guess I always felt like I wouldn't get answers, so I didn't search for them." Henry nodded, absorbing Daniel's words. "I can't imagine how difficult that must have been. And now with this revelation, I understand how it feels to have your world flipped upside down." Daniel turned to Henry, his expression softening. "And how does it feel for you?" "It feels like a betrayal, honestly," Henry admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "But it's also an opportunity, a chance to understand a part of my life I never knew existed. A chance to connect with you." Daniel considered this for a moment, weighing Henry's sincerity against the emotions that clouded his judgment. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, but I'll give you a chance. For my mother's sake." "Thank you," Henry said, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. They sat in silence for a moment, the air charged with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. "Tell me about her," Daniel finally said. "What kind of person is Eleanor?" Henry's heart swelled with emotion as he began to recount stories of Eleanor. Their love, their life together, the moments that defined their marriage. "She's kind, compassionate, and fiercely loyal. We built a life together, raised children, and supported each other through thick and thin. I can't imagine my life without her." Daniel listened intently, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly. "It sounds like you loved her very much." "I did," Henry replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And I still do. But this secret has cast a shadow over everything." "I can see that," Daniel said, his tone softening. "It sounds like you both have a lot to work through." "Yes, we do," Henry agreed. "But I'm hopeful that maybe this can be a new beginning for all of us." The two men sat side by side on the park bench, the weight of their shared history settling around them like the fallen leaves. In that moment, they were no longer just a father and son brought together by a painful past. They were two men searching for connection and understanding in a world that had kept them apart for far too long. Henry sat in the dim light of the living room, the air heavy with an unspoken tension. The early autumn sun cast a golden hue through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He could hear Eleanor in the kitchen, her movements, slower and more deliberate than usual, as if she were carefully crafting each motion, trying to avoid the weight of their recent revelations. A few days had passed since he returned from New York, and the conversation he had with Daniel still echoed in his mind. The memory of Daniel's piercing gaze, filled with skepticism and hurt, made Henry's heart ache. He was a man torn between two worlds: on one side the love he had for Eleanor, and on the other the undeniable connection to the son he never knew existed. Henry. Eleanor's voice broke through his thoughts, soft and tentative. She appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her eyes searching his face for signs of what he might be feeling. "Do you want some tea?" He nodded, forcing a smile. "Sure, that sounds nice." As she moved to prepare the tea, he watched her closely. The woman he had spent more than half a century with seemed like a stranger at times. The revelation of her past had shattered the image he had held of their life together, and yet beneath the pain, there was still a flicker of the love that had once defined them. "Henry," she began, her voice trembling slightly as she poured hot water into 2 cups. "I've been thinking about what Daniel said, about needing time." She turned to face him, her expression somber. "Do you think he'll ever want to see me again?" "I don't know, Eleanor," he replied, his voice low. "He's been through a lot. I can only imagine what it must feel like for him." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "I wish I could take it all back. The choice I made, and I thought I was protecting you, us. But I see now that I only created more pain." Henry felt a wave of compassion for her. "You were scared, Eleanor. We were both young and the world was different then." He paused, searching for the right words. "You're not alone in this." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I just don't know how to reach out to him. I don't even know if he wants to know me." "Maybe he does," Henry said, his voice tinged with hope. "You need to let him decide how he feels. Just be honest with him. That's all any of us can do." Eleanor nodded, but her expression remained clouded with uncertainty. "What if he hates me?" Henry shifted in his chair, leaning forward. "He might feel anger or confusion, but he deserves to hear your side. You owe him that much." The kettle whistled, and Eleanor moved to pour the steaming water into the cups. As she handed one to Henry, their fingers brushed, and a spark of their old familiarity ignited briefly before fading away. "Do you think he'll ever forgive me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Forgiveness takes time," he replied, taking a sip of tea. It was warm and soothing, but could do little to ease the coldness that had settled in his heart. "But you'll never know unless you try." The days dragged on, and Henry found himself in a strange limbo, waiting for Daniel to reach out again. He had given the young man space, but the silence was deafening. Each morning he would check his phone, his heart racing at every buzz, only to be met with disappointment. One evening, as the shadows lengthened in their quiet home, the phone rang. Henry's heart leaped, and he quickly answered, his pulse quickening as he said, "Hello, Mr. Calloway." The voice on the other end was formal and smooth, but there was an undercurrent of something more, a hint of vulnerability. "Yes, this is Henry Calloway," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "This is Daniel Turner. I got your letter." Henry's breath caught in his throat. "Daniel, I'm glad you called." "I have some questions," Daniel continued. His tone clipped. "About my mother. About why she gave me up." Henry swallowed hard, knowing how delicate the situation was. "I understand. I'll do my best to answer. But first I want you to know that your mother, she never forgot you. She's been carrying this burden for a long time." There was a pause on the other end, and Henry could almost hear Daniel processing his words. "I need to know everything," Daniel finally said, his voice firm. "I deserve to understand what happened." "Yes, you do," Henry agreed, feeling a mix of dread and relief. "Eleanor wants to talk to you. She's ready to answer your questions." "Is she—" Daniel sounded skeptical. "How can I trust what she says after so many years?" "I can't ask you to trust her blindly," Henry said, his heart racing as he tried to find the right words. "But she's sincere about wanting to make amends. It's a lot to process. And I know it won't be easy, but I believe you both deserve the chance to confront the past." "I'll think about it," Daniel replied, his tone still guarded. "But I can't make any promises." "Just take your time," Henry said, feeling a glimmer of hope. "You don't have to decide right now." As they ended the call, Henry felt a mix of emotions wash over him. It was a small step, but a step nonetheless. He couldn't shake the anxiety that came with the uncertainty of what would come next, but he knew they were moving forward, however slowly. Days turned into a week, and as he prepared for another quiet evening at home, the doorbell rang. Eleanor looked up from the couch, her expression a mixture of surprise and apprehension. "Who could that be?" she asked, glancing at Henry. "I'll check," he said, his heart racing as he approached the door. He opened it, and there stood Daniel, his expression unreadable. "Henry?" he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. "I'm here to see my mother." Henry's heart soared and sank at the same time. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to allow Daniel to enter. Eleanor rose from her seat, her eyes widening with disbelief. "Daniel," she breathed, her voice trembling. "Hello, Mom," Daniel said, his gaze locked onto hers. The silence that followed was thick with emotion, each person grappling with years of unresolved feelings. Henry stood back, sensing the gravity of the moment, allowing the mother and son to face one another, without his interference. Eleanor took a tentative step forward, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. I don't know where to begin," she stammered, her voice breaking. Daniel crossed his arms, his posture defensive. "Maybe start with the truth," he replied, his tone cool but not unkind. She nodded, swallowing hard. "I'm so sorry, Daniel. I made a choice that I thought was right at the time, but I see now how wrong it was. I was terrified and I felt so alone. I never stopped thinking about you." Daniel's expression softened ever so slightly, but he remained guarded. "And what about Dad? Did he deserve the truth?" Eleanor's eyes shimmered with tears. "He did, and I regret keeping that from him for so long. I thought I was protecting him, but I see now that it only caused more pain. I was selfish." Daniel shifted uncomfortably, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "You don't expect me to forgive you just like that, do you?" "No, I don't," she replied, her voice steadying. "I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to understand I never stopped loving you." "I don't know what that means," Daniel said, the vulnerability creeping back into his voice. "I had a life, a family that loved me. I never thought I needed to know my biological parents." "I understand that now," Eleanor said, her voice laced with regret. "But I want to be part of your life if you'll let me. I want to make things right." Henry watched the exchange, his heart aching for both of them. He knew that the road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but there was a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could begin to rebuild what had been lost. "Take your time," he said gently, stepping forward. "This is just the beginning. You both have a lot to work through, but I believe you can find a way forward." As Daniel nodded slowly, the tension in the room began to shift. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a start. The past could not be changed, but the present was ripe with possibilities. And in that moment, amidst the pain and uncertainty, Henry felt a sense of peace wash over him. They were finally confronting the truth, and perhaps they could find their way back to each other. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden hue over the small Ohio town, Henry Callaway sat in his living room, a sense of weight hanging heavily in the air. The once vibrant photographs on the walls, chronicling a life filled with laughter and love, now seemed to serve as painful reminders of the secrets that had been kept hidden for far too long. His heart ached, not just from the revelation of Eleanor's past, but from the uncertainty of what the future could hold. Eleanor sat across from him, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a tissue. "Henry," she began, her voice soft and filled with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting our family." Henry looked at her, his brow furrowed. "You thought you were protecting me," he echoed incredulously. "By keeping this from me for 55 years, Eleanor, you've shattered everything I believed about us." "I know," she replied, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I was scared. I thought if you knew you would leave me, I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. Yet here we are, Henry said, his voice heavy with bitterness. You kept a part of yourself hidden from me. How can I trust you again? Eleanor's shoulders slumped as she looked away, unable to meet his gaze. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I need you to understand that it was never about you. It was about my fear and shame. Henry stood up abruptly, the chair scraping against the wooden floor. Fear and shame, those emotions drove you to give away our child. That's not just a mistake, Eleanor. That's a choice you made without me. I was fighting for our country while you were making decisions about our family on your own. The raw emotion in the room was palpable, each word piercing through the silence that had settled like a heavy fog. Henry walked to the window, staring out at the street, where children played their laughter, starkly contrasting with the turmoil inside his heart. Henry, Eleanor's voice broke through his thoughts, trembling but insistent. I've carried this guilt for so long. Every day I've thought about him. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how. I thought I could take it to my grave. He turned to face her frustration, mingling with a flicker of empathy. And what about me? What about my right to know, to understand who I am, who we are? Eleanor nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. You're right, you deserved to know I was selfish. I thought I could bear the weight of this alone. But now I see that it's not just my burden. She paused, taking a shuddering breath. It's ours, and I want to help you find him if that's what you want. Henry's heart softened slightly at her words. There was a sincerity in her tone that hadn't been there before. You mean that? He asked, his voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. Yes, she replied, her face lighting up with a glimmer of hope. I want you to find him. I want you to have that closure, even if it's painful. With a heavy sigh, Henry raked a hand through his hair, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. I need time, Eleanor. I need to process this, all of this. He gestured to the world outside, the noise of life continuing despite their unraveling. I can't just jump into a search without knowing what I'm feeling. I understand, she said softly. Take all the time you need. I'll be here waiting for you. As Henry sank back into his chair, he felt a mixture of anger and sadness. The thought of searching for a son he never knew existed was daunting. But alongside, it was an undeniable curiosity, a yearning to understand the child that had been a part of his life, even if only in the shadows. What if he doesn't want to meet me? He mused aloud, a hint of fear creeping into his voice. Then we'll deal with that too, Eleanor said, her voice steady. But we won't know unless we try. You deserve answers, Henry. The room fell into silence, both of them lost in their thoughts. The air was thick with unresolved emotions, and Henry could feel the tension coiling within him. Finally, he stood up again, resolve settling in his chest. I think I need to speak to someone about this, maybe a private investigator. I want to know where he is, what his life has been like. Eleanor's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with warmth. That's a good idea. I can help with anything you need. I still have the adoption papers. Maybe there's something in there we can use. Let's look at them together, Henry said, his heart racing at the thought of taking that first step. But Eleanor, understand that this won't be easy. We have a lot of hurt to untangle. I know, she replied, wiping her tears away. But it's a start, and I promise to support you every step of the way. As they began to sift through the old box of memories, Henry felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. Hope not just for finding Daniel, but for understanding the complex tapestry of their lives. Maybe, just maybe, they could piece together the fragments of their shattered family. Henry, Eleanor said tentatively, breaking the silence as she handed him a faded envelope. This is the last letter I received from the adoption agency. It has a contact number. He took the envelope, his fingers brushing against the paper as if it were a delicate relic from another world. Thank you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The reality of what lay ahead was daunting, but for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of purpose. I'll call them tomorrow. Eleanor smiled faintly, a bittersweet expression on her face. You'll find him. And when you do, whatever happens, remember that I'm here for you. Henry nodded, knowing that the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but with Eleanor by his side, there was a newfound sense of possibility. As the evening light faded into dusk, they sat together in a silence that spoke of both sorrow and the promise of a path forward, a path that might finally lead them to the sun they had lost. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden light over the bustling streets of New York City. Daniel Turner stood outside his office building, the towering skyscrapers looming over him like silent sentinels. He had spent the past few days in a haze, alternating between disbelief and anger, at the revelation that had rocked his world. The news that Henry Callaway, a man claiming to be his biological father, had reached out to him, gnawed at the corners of his mind. As he took a deep breath, the cool air filled his lungs, grounding him momentarily. Daniel's heart raced and his hands fidgeted with the fabric of his tailored suit. He had spent years building a life he was proud of, and now this unexpected twist of fate threatened to unravel everything. With a resolute expression, he steeled himself for the encounter he had reluctantly agreed to. "Here goes nothing," he muttered under his breath, pushing through the revolving door and stepping into the lobby. Inside the lobby was a cacophony of sounds, the distant hum of conversations, the muted clacking of heels on polished marble, and the intermittent ping of the elevator doors. Daniel made his way to the small cafe tucked in the corner where he had arranged to meet Henry. He glanced at his watch, noting he was a few minutes early. Sipping on his coffee, he ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of anticipation settle on his shoulders. The thought of facing Henry, the man who had fathered him yet was a complete stranger, sent shivers down his spine. He had so many questions swirling in his mind, but what if he didn't like the answers? What if he didn't want to know the truth? Just then, the bell above the cafe door jingled, and Daniel looked up to see Henry entering. The older man appeared, fragile, his hair wispy and white, and his face etched with the lines of a life well lived. He spotted Daniel and hesitated for a moment, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Daniel felt a strange mix of emotions wash over him, compassion, anger, and an inexplicable urge to know this man who shared his blood. "Daniel," Henry said, his voice thick with emotion as he approached. "Thank you for meeting me." "Let's get this over with," Daniel replied, trying to keep his tone neutral, but the sharpness of his words hung in the air like a tense string ready to snap. Henry nodded, his expression pained, and they settled down at a small table in the corner. Surefire atmosphere was charged, both men grappling with the gravity of the moment. "I know this is all confusing," Henry began, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I can't even begin to imagine what you're feeling." "Confusing doesn't even begin to cover it," Daniel shot back, a hint of bitterness seeping into his voice. "You've had all these years to figure things out, and now I'm supposed to just accept you. I don't expect you to," Henry replied softly, his gaze steady. "I just want you to know the truth. I want to explain why I didn't come looking for you." Daniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. What could possibly justify leaving a child behind? Henry took a deep breath, the weight of the past pressing heavily upon him. "I was young, scared, and ashamed. I didn't know how to face my own mistakes. Eleanor, she was terrified too. We thought it was best for you to have a family that could provide for you, love you in a way we couldn't." Daniel clenched his jaw, fighting the swell of emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "And what makes you think I wanted anything to do with you? I had a life, a family, a career. I'm not asking for you to forgive me," Henry said, his voice trembling slightly. I needed to meet you. I needed you to know that you were loved even if I wasn't there." "Loved?" Daniel scoffed, disbelief evident in his tone. "Love doesn't just vanish into thin air. I grew up wondering about my origins, about who I was. And now you expect me to just accept you as my father, just like that?" Henry's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I know it's a lot to process. I can't change the past, but I want to be part of your life moving forward, if you'll let me." Silence enveloped them as Daniel considered the weight of Henry's words. He had built walls around his heart, protecting himself from the pain of rejection and abandonment. Could he really tear those walls down? "Why now?" Daniel finally asked, his voice less sharp, but still laced with skepticism. Why come looking for me after all these years? Because Eleanor is sick, Henry confessed, his voice breaking. We thought we had more time together. When she told me the truth, I realized I couldn't leave this world without knowing you, without trying to make things right. Daniel's heart ached at the anguish in Henry's expression. So this is about her, not about me? No, Henry said, shaking his head vehemently. It's about both of you. I want to repair the damage I've caused to make amends for the choices I made. I want to be part of your life if you'll allow me to. Repair the damage, Daniel echoed, his anger simmering just below the surface. You can't just fix what's broken. It doesn't work that way. I know, Henry said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I want to try. I want to understand you, to understand what you've been through. Daniel felt a flicker of vulnerability creep in, but he quickly smothered it. You don't know me. You don't know anything about my life. Then let me learn, Henry urged, leaning forward earnestly. I want to hear your story. I want to understand who you are. Daniel's defenses wavered as he wrestled with the conflicting emotions swirling inside him. He had built a life on his own terms, and yet here was this man pleading for a connection he hadn't even known he desired. Fine, Daniel said finally, his voice steadier now. But this doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive you, or even want a relationship. I need time. I need space. Time is all I ask, Henry replied, relief flooding his features. I'll be here whenever you're ready. As they continued to talk, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this was a pivotal moment in his life. The journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was a glimmer of hope nestled within the pain. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace, oblivious to the transformative conversation taking place inside the café. Daniel was acutely aware of the choices laid before him, choices that could redefine his understanding of family identity and love. He had always been a solitary figure, but now he found himself standing at a crossroads, staring into the unknown. Henry Calloway sat alone in the dim light of his study, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. He glanced at the clock and the wall. It was late afternoon, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the room. The photographs of his life with Eleanor hung on the walls, their smiles frozen in time, now haunting reminders of the past he thought he knew. But everything had changed in an instant, and he was left grappling with a truth that shattered the foundation of his existence. The memories of Eleanor's revelation echoed in his mind, the trembling of her voice, the tear-filled eyes, the confession that had turned his world upside down. She had carried the burden of a secret for over 50 years, and now it was his turn to bear the weight of that truth. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, trying to suppress the turmoil within him. A part of him wanted to retreat further into the cocoon of denial, to ignore the reality of their lost child. But another part, one fueled by a desperate need for closure, urged him to act. Henry. Eleanor's voice broke through his thoughts, soft and hesitant. She stood in the doorway, clutching the small box she had given him earlier, the one containing the adoption papers and a photo of the baby she had given away. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of fear and hope, as if she were unsure whether to step into the room or retreat back into the safety of the hallway. "Come in," he replied, his voice sounding foreign even to his own ears. He gestured toward the chair opposite him, but Eleanor hesitated, her foot tapping nervously on the wooden floor. I just wanted to see how you were feeling," she said, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I know this is hard for you." "Hard?" He let out a humorless laugh, the sound bitter on his lips. "It's more than hard, Eleanor. It's unimaginable. You kept this from me for so long. How could you do that?" "I was scared, Henry. I thought if you knew you would leave me," she said, her voice rising slightly, desperation creeping into her tone. "I loved you too much to risk losing you. I thought I could take that secret to the grave." He met her gaze, searching for the woman he had loved for decades. "And what about our son? Did you think about him? What if he needed us? What if he's out there wondering who he is?" The hurt in his voice was palpable, each word laced with a mixture of anger and pain. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "I never stopped thinking about him. Not a day went by that I didn't wonder what he was like, if he was happy. I thought I was protecting you and our family by keeping him a secret. Protecting? He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. You robbed me of the chance to know my own child, to be a father. You made that choice for me. I know, she whispered, her voice breaking. And I'm so sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I need you to understand why I did it. Understanding doesn't change the fact that our lives have been built on a lie, Eleanor. The weight of the words hung heavily between them, a chasm that felt insurmountable. Eleanor took a deep breath, her composure wavering. I understand if you need time, but please, can we at least try to find him together? I want to make this right. I want to help you find him. Henry's heart raced at the thought. He had been contemplating the same thing, the urge to seek out the son he had never known. But it was complicated now, tangled in a web of emotions. I don't know if I can do that with you, Eleanor. This is your mess. I can't just pretend everything is fine. I don't want you to pretend, she pleaded, her voice trembling. I just want to be part of this. I want to support you no matter what happens. You deserve to know him. Henry stared at her, the battle within him raging. He felt the anger, the betrayal, but beneath it all was a flicker of hope, an ember ignited by the possibility of connection. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. What if he doesn't want to see you? What if he blames you for what happened? Then I'll accept that, she said softly. But I have to try. For him. For us. Silence enveloped the boar. Room the weight of their shared history pressing down like an anchor. Henry's mind raced, envisioning the possibility of finding Daniel Turner, the son who had been lost to them for so long. I'll need to speak to someone who can help us find him, he finally said, his voice steadier now. Are you sure? Eleanor asked, a glimmer of hope lighting her eyes. Yes, he replied, determination settling in. But it won't be easy. I'm not making any promises. And I need you to understand that this won't fix everything. I know, she said, nodding slowly. I just want the chance to try. With a heavy heart, Henry reached for the small box on the table, picking it up and staring at the contents. The adoption papers felt like an anchor to a past that was both painful and necessary. We need to start here, he said, opening the box and pulling out the documents. Eleanor leaned closer, her breath hitching as she recognized the baby's name on the certificate. Daniel, she whispered, as if saying his name could bridge the gap that time had created. Daniel? Henry echoed the name, lingering in the air like a prayer. I hope he's happy. I hope he's had a good life. Eleanor wiped away a tear, her heart aching for the child she had given away. I never wanted to hurt him. Or you. I just didn't know how to face the truth. Neither did I, Henry admitted, his voice softer now. But we have to face it together, even if it's painful. As they sat together in the fading light of the room, both lost in their thoughts, a sense of shared purpose began to emerge. They would seek out Daniel not just to heal the wounds of the past, but to forge a new path forward. It wouldn't be easy, but perhaps it would be worth it. Henry Calloway sat in the dim light of his living room, the weight of the past bearing down on him like a heavy fog. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by the ticking of the clock on the wall, a reminder of time slipping away. He could feel the palpable tension in the air, a mixture of unresolved emotions swirling between him and his wife Eleanor, who was seated across from him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The shadows danced around them, mirroring the turmoil in their hearts. Henry, Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice barely a whisper. I know this is hard. I never wanted to hurt you. I was so scared. He looked up at her, the pain in his chest tightening like a vice. Scared you kept this from me for over 50 years, Eleanor. 50 years of our lives built on a lie. How do you expect me to process that? His voice cracked, revealing the vulnerability he had tried so hard to conceal. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. I thought I could take it to my grave. I thought it would be easier for both of us if I just forgot. But I couldn't forget. It haunted me every day. I thought if I told you, I would lose you. Did you ever consider that keeping this secret might hurt me more? Henry shot back, his voice rising with frustration. You say you loved me, but how can you love someone while hiding something so monumental? You made a choice to keep me in the dark. Eleanor flinched at his words, her shoulders slumping as if he had physically struck her. I know, and I can't change the past. But please try to understand. I was young and terrified. I thought I was protecting us. Protecting us, Henry echoed incredulously. You protected your shame, Eleanor, and now I'm left to pick up the pieces of a life that feels like a lie. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Eleanor took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I can't change what I did, but I want to help you find him. I want you to know him if that's what you want. I owe you that much, don't I? Henry's heart raced at the thought of finding his son, his lost child. A mix of anger and longing surged within him. You want to help me after everything? How can I trust you? You kept this from me for so long. I understand how you feel, she pleaded, her voice trembling. But I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. I just want to make things right for both of us and for him. Henry's thoughts raced. The memory of their life together flashed before him, the laughter, the shared dreams, the moments he had cherished. Would he be able to reconcile those memories with this new, painful reality? He felt like he was standing at the edge of a precipice, uncertain of what lay below. Where do we even start? He asked, his voice softer now, but still laced with uncertainty. Eleanor reached for the small box she had placed on the coffee table earlier, sliding it toward him. I've kept everything I could. The adoption papers, the letters, and even the pictures. I thought one day I might need them to explain to him. To you. Her voice broke at the end, and she bit her lip to hold back the tears. Henry hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside were documents yellowed with age, a small stack of papers that felt heavier than they looked. He touched the top sheet gently, his fingers tracing the words that had altered the course of his life. The name Daniel Turner stared back at him, a name he had never known but now felt like a phantom whisper in his ear. What do you want me to do with this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Find him, Eleanor said, her gaze steady and pleading. You deserve to know him. We both do. I want you to have the chance to meet him and to understand. Maybe he can help us. Help you heal. Henry looked into Eleanor's eyes and saw the desperation there, but he also saw a glimmer of hope. And what about you? What do you expect from this? Do you want to meet him too? Eleanor swallowed hard, her expression shifting from anxiety to determination. Honestly, I don't know. I'm terrified of what he might think of me. But I know I owe him an explanation. I made that choice and I need to face it. The air between them shifted, a fragile understanding beginning to form. You want me to find him. But what if he doesn't want to meet us? Henry asked. What if he hates us? Eleanor sighed, her shoulders sagging again. That's a risk we have to take. But we owe it to him to try. To tell him the truth, to let him know. He was loved, even from afar. Henry stared at the box, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He felt torn between the life he had known and the possibility of something entirely new. I need time, he said slowly. Time to think about all of this. Take all the time you need, Eleanor replied gently. But please don't. Shut me out. I want to help, Henry. I need to help. As the evening light dimmed, casting long shadows across the room, Henry realized that the path ahead was uncertain. He had spent his life seeking stability, but now he stood on the brink of a journey that could unravel everything he thought he knew. I'll think about it, he said finally, his voice heavy with the weight of his words. I'll think about finding him. Eleanor nodded, a flicker of hope igniting in her eyes. That's all I ask for now. With that, Henry closed the box, the documents resting inside like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The complexity of emotions swirling between them felt like a storm, but through the chaos, a fragile connection began to emerge, one that might just allow them to navigate the tumultuous waters ahead. Henry sat in a small cafe in New York, his hands trembling slightly as he wrapped them around a steaming cup of coffee. The city was alive outside with the bustle of people moving hurriedly past the windows, but inside he felt like time had come to a standstill. He was a man out of place, caught between the weight of the past and the uncertainty of the future. He had shared a few brief exchanges with Daniel over the phone, but now sitting here waiting for their first face-to-face encounter, He was overwhelmed by a mix of anxiety and hope. The door swung open, and a gust of cold air swept through the cafe, drawing Henry's attention. Daniel walked in with an air of confidence, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, his posture straight, and his expression guarded. He scanned the room, and when his gaze landed on Henry, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. Henry's heart raced. This was the moment he had anticipated, yet dreaded ever since Eleanor's confession. Henry Calloway. Daniel's voice was steady, but there was a hint of skepticism laced within it. "Yes, that's me," Henry replied, rising awkwardly from his seat. "Thank you for meeting me." Daniel nodded, but his eyes remained distant. "I'll admit I wasn't sure if I would come. It's a lot to process." "Believe me, I understand," Henry said, gesturing toward the chair across from him. "Please have a seat." Daniel hesitated for a moment, then lowered himself into the chair, his posture still rigid. He looked around the cafe as if searching for anything to distract him from the conversation that needed to happen. "So what do you want to talk about?" Henry took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of the moment. "I wanted to explain everything, if you'll allow me." Daniel's brow furrowed and he crossed his arms defensively. "I'm not sure. There's much to explain. Eleanor gave me up, that's the truth." "Yes, it is," Henry said softly, his heart aching at the thought of his wife's past decisions. "But there's so much more to it. I can't change what happened, but I can tell you about her, about us." Daniel leaned back slightly, still guarded. "Why now? Why after all these years?" "Because I didn't know about you until recently," Henry admitted, glancing down at his coffee. "Eleanor kept it a secret for so long, and when she finally told me, it felt like my whole world crumbled. I needed to find you. Not just for myself, but for her too." "Why should I care about what she feels?" Daniel shot back, his voice rising. "She's the one who abandoned me." Henry winced at the bitterness in Daniel's tone. "I can't imagine the pain of being given up, Daniel. But there's more to Eleanor than that single choice. She carried the weight of her decision for decades, and it haunted her." Daniel's expression softened for a brief moment, but he quickly masked it with a hardened facade. "Haunted her? How?" "Every day," Henry said, his voice steadying. "She loved you from the moment she found out she was pregnant. The decision to give you up was one of the hardest things she ever had to do. She was terrified and she thought it was for the best." "Best for whom?" Daniel challenged, his eyes narrowing. "You her it certainly wasn't for me." "No, it wasn't," Henry agreed, his heart heavy. "But she thought she was doing the right thing. She was young, scared, and alone. I wish she'd been able to share that burden with me, but she didn't. I'd like to think that if she had, we could have faced it together." Daniel's gaze drifted to the window where people bustled by, completely unaware of the turmoil inside the cafe. "You talk about love like it's a cure-all, but it doesn't fix the past, does it?" "No, it doesn't," Henry replied, his voice firm yet gentle. "But it's a starting point, a chance to understand, to forgive. I know it's not easy, but I'm here to help you navigate this if you'll let me." Daniel looked back at Henry, his eyes searching. "And what do you expect from me? Do you want some kind of father-son relationship just because we share blood?" "No," Henry said quickly, shaking his head. "I don't expect anything from you. I just want to offer you the truth, my truth, our truth. I want you to know who you are and where you come from. And if that leads to something more, then that's wonderful. But if not, I understand." A long silence stretched between them, the weight of their words hanging in the air. Daniel's expression was unreadable, and Henry could feel the tension radiating from him. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice quieter now. "What do you want me to say to?" "I want you to say what's in your heart," Henry urged, "whether that's anger, sadness, or something else entirely. I want you to be honest with me." Daniel let out a breath, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. "I don't know how I feel," he confessed. "I've built a life without knowing any of this, and now suddenly it's all crashing down on me." Henry nodded, understanding the turmoil that Daniel was grappling with. "It's a lot to process, but you don't have to go through it alone. You have a choice now, to explore this new chapter or to walk away." "I don't even know if I want to meet Eleanor," Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do I say to her? Thanks for giving me up." Henry felt a pang of sympathy. "You could say that, but I hope you'll also consider asking her about her reasons, her fears. It's important to hear her side. She may not deserve your forgiveness, but she does deserve to explain herself. Daniel's expression softened further, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through his tough exterior. I just don't want to get hurt again. I understand, Henry said gently. I can't promise a fairy tale ending, but I can promise you that you'll have the opportunity to find your truth. Daniel considered this for a moment, his gaze drifting back to the window where the world outside continued its relentless pace. Maybe I'll think about it, I need time. Take all the time you need, Henry reassured him. I'll be here no matter what you decide. As they sat in silence, the cafe buzzed around them, but for Henry and Daniel it felt as if the outside world had faded away. They were two men from different paths that had somehow converged at this moment, each grappling with the weight of their shared history, uncertain of the future ahead. Finally, Daniel stirred his eyes, meeting Henry's. I appreciate you coming here, I really do. I don't know how to process any of this yet. Henry smiled, a glimmer of hope igniting in his heart. Neither do I, but we'll figure it out together step by step. With that, a tentative understanding began to form between them, fragile yet promising. Whatever the future held, they had taken the first step toward healing, and for now, that was enough. Henry Calloway stood by the window of his small home in Ohio, a sense of bittersweet nostalgia washing over him as he gazed at the vibrant autumn leaves dancing in the wind. He had always found solace in this view, a comfort that had accompanied him through decades of life with Eleanor. But today that solace was overshadowed by the weight of secrets that had emerged only days before, secrets that had shattered the very foundation of his existence. In the dim light of the room, Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, a worn-out piece of furniture that had witnessed countless moments of love and laughter. Her hands trembled slightly as they rested on her lap, and her eyes were distant, lost in memories that were now tainted by the truth she had revealed. The silence between them was heavy, a palpable tension that neither knew how to navigate. Henry. Eleanor finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. I know this is hard for you. I never wanted to hurt you. Henry turned to face her, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. You never wanted to hurt me, Eleanor. You've kept this from me for 55 years. How could you think I wouldn't want to know? How could you think I wouldn't understand? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears and she looked away. I was afraid. I thought if I told you I would lose you. I couldn't bear the thought of that. Lose me, Eleanor, you've already lost me. I don't even know who you are anymore. His words hung in the air, sharp and cutting, and he regretted them the moment they left his lips. But the pain was too raw, too fresh. I've been living with this weight for so long, Henry. I thought I could take it to my grave. She wiped her eyes, her voice breaking. But when I saw you getting weaker, I realized I couldn't leave you with this burden. You deserve the truth even if it hurts. Henry felt his heart clench. The woman he had loved, the woman he had built a life with, was now a stranger, a person defined by a single choice. And what about our life? Was it all a lie? Did you ever love me? Eleanor's tears flowed freely now. Of course I loved you, I still do. But I was young and scared, and I thought I could manage it all alone. I thought I could protect us. Protect you. Protect me, Henry echoed, incredulous. By keeping me in the dark, by allowing me to build a life on a foundation of lies. The room fell silent once more, the weight of their conversation pressing down on them. Henry turned back to the window, forcing himself to breathe deeply. Outside, the world continued on, blissfully unaware of the turmoil inside their home. I need to find him, he said finally, his voice firm. I need to find our son. Eleanor flinched at the word. Henry, please, I don't do this. It could open old wounds for both of us. What if he doesn't want to know us? I have to know, he insisted, his resolve hardening. He's part of us, Eleanor. Whether you like it or not, he's part of our story. I can't just pretend he doesn't exist. Eleanor leaned forward, desperation in her eyes. And what if he hates me? What if he hates you? This could destroy everything we've built, Henry. Everything we've built is already destroyed. I need to know if he's okay. I need to know if he had a good life. As Eleanor watched the man she loved slip further away, she felt her heart break anew. "I'll help you," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I'll help you find him." Days turned into a blur as Henry and Eleanor began their search for Daniel Turner. They pored over old documents searching for any clues that might lead them to their son. Henry felt a sense of urgency as he rifled through the papers, each one a reminder of the life he had lived without knowing the truth. "I can't believe we're doing this," Eleanor murmured, her voice heavy with emotion. "We have to, Eleanor. We owe it to him. We owe it to ourselves," Henry replied, a fire igniting in his chest. The day arrived when they would meet with Greg Porter, the private investigator they had hired to help them track down Daniel. Henry paced nervously in the small office, the walls lined with photos of families and happy moments, moments that now felt foreign to him. Eleanor sat quietly in a chair, wringing her hands. "Mr. Calloway," Greg said as he entered the room, his demeanor professional but warm. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Thank you for helping us," Henry replied, his voice strained. Greg pulled out a folder, flipping through the pages. "I've tracked down some information about your son. Daniel Turner was adopted by a couple in New York. He's now an accomplished lawyer. I have his address and contact details." Henry felt a rush of emotions, relief, fear, and a bittersweet longing. "Can we meet him?" "I'd recommend starting with a letter," Greg suggested. "It's often less overwhelming for both parties." Eleanor nodded slowly, her heart racing. "A letter might be good. It gives him time to process." As Henry took the address from Greg, he felt the weight of the moment. What if he doesn't want to see us? What if he hates us? "Then we'll deal with that when it comes, Greg," said his voice steady. "But at least you'll have tried." Henry clutched the paper tightly, the reality of his quest sinking in. "I'll write to him tonight." That evening the house felt different. There was a sense of purpose, but also an undercurrent of fear. Henry sat at his desk, pen poised over paper, struggling to find the right words. "Dear Daniel." He began, his heart racing as he poured out his thoughts. He wrote about his love for Eleanor, the life they had built, and the truth that had come to light. He poured his heart into the letter, hoping to convey the depth of his regret and the sincerity of his intentions. When he finished, he looked at Eleanor, who was standing in the doorway, watching him with a mixture of pride and concern. "Do you think he'll understand?" he asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Eleanor stepped into the room, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You've been honest, Henry. That's all you can do. Just give him time." With the letter sealed and addressed, Henry felt a mixture of relief and dread. He was opening a door that could lead to reconciliation or heartbreak. But deep down, he knew it was a risk worth taking. As he prepared to send the letter, he glanced at Eleanor, whose eyes were filled with unshed tears. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," he promised, and for the first time since the revelation he felt a flicker of hope. "Together," Eleanor echoed, her voice strong despite the tears, and with that Henry took a deep breath, ready to step into the unknown.